Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and patch 10.1.5 has just come out, and already we are seeing some massive shifts in what is being played in both Raid and Mythic Plus. So I figured while Researchers Under Fire happens here and I earn my rep for the week, because you can do this standing on top of this pillar. I'm a bit of a plague, I do this all the time. It would be a good time to do a meta spotlight, meta snapshot thing video. So let's start off by talking about Mythic Plus, which is where I think I struggle to say whether this is bigger than the changes that we've seen in the Raid metagame so far, or that will happen in Raid, but it is very apparent already that things have been shaken up in a huge way, and in my opinion, it's looking pretty bad for composition diversity. So this is the top 20 runs so far this week. These aren't actually all the top runs that exist. If you look at all affixes, there are 2 runs from last week that would make it onto this list. But almost all of the top runs already, with less than a little bit over 48 hours of the patch being out, are already on this affix week, which is partially due to the affixes being pretty favorable, but I think a lot of it is due to our power level increasing with the addition of Augmentation Evoker, with buffs to several other classes, with massive buffs to Holy Paladin, making it an insane healer. So we can take a look at some of these top runs right now, and you can see in the tanking role, players are succeeding with Bear, majority of the tanks, but not a huge majority, and there are a lot of people doing well on Vengeance as well. You do need to go pretty deep to start seeing other tanks show up, though. Not a lot of people are playing other tanks in our top 100 here, right? We're seeing 1 warrior, 1 paladin I've counted so far in the top 100. We've got our first monk and DK below top 100 of the runs right now. So tank diversity, I think, has taken a little bit of a step down. I mean, it wasn't much better than this before. There was also kind of just Bear DK or Bear DH world before, so maybe tank balance is about as good as it was in 10.1.0. Healer balance, we are seeing much worse than... I'm not sure if the word ever is appropriate here yet. Again, maybe it's too early to call as well, because it has only been out for 50 something hours at the time of recording this, but almost all of the top runs are including a Holy Paladin. Every single high-end Mythic Pluser that I know that is a healer is either playing Holy Paladin or planning to play Holy Paladin and gearing one up right now, because it seems busted compared to all the other healers, which is not especially good. Let's see if I can... For some reason, maybe if I change this to all affixes. Okay. This is going to be... Now, I was going to try and show with the graphs here, but I think because I changed it to all affixes, it's still going to overwhelmingly be 10.1.0 data, so we can't get a nice graph from Raider.io yet for 10.1.5, but I suspect even if we were to go... Let's go 100 pages deep and see what things are looking like there. And here things are starting to look better. This is down in the 24s. And down in the 24s, we're seeing a bit of a nice rainbow actually going, which, 24 is a very high key level still. So it's possible that my criticism should be limited to the very highest of keys. Definitely still a lot of paladins here. And again, when there is something that's super broken, the change to everybody adopting it happens first at the highest level, and then that sort of trickles down if it doesn't get fixed quickly by Blizzard. So there's definitely a good chance that some of the players here that are capable and interested in multi-classing will pull the trigger on doing that soon. And yeah, I mean, even here on in this range, we're seeing, still a lot of pink on this page. What if we change this to 1,000 pages in? 1,000 pages in, yeah, I mean, even here, so this is now 22 chests, and the more than half of the healers, 7 healer specs, more than half of the ones on this page are Holy Paladin. So I would say there's a balance emergency in the healer role that needs to be fixed as soon as possible. The tanking side, it would be good to possibly deliver some nerfs to these 2 specs. You could also accomplish some stuff with some buffs to some of the other specs, but it's not as bad, given that there's at least 2 options, which 2 out of 6 is a lot better than 1 out of 7. DPS side of things, now here, things have also gotten a lot worse than last season. If you go watch my Meta Spotlight video from a couple of weeks ago, The TLDR there was like Shadow Priest is really good, but everything, like there are like 12 good specs that people are using in high key pushing. Right now, even after only 2 days of the metagame kind of developing, we are seeing a huge funnel down towards this one composition with a few variants. And that comp is Mage, Augmentation Evoker, Shadow Priest. This comp is so good because your Shadow Priest is bringing you a power infusion for your Mage, and is also bringing you Mass Spell, and is also bringing you Fortitude, which is really nice for the kind of survival check nature of Keystones this season. Your Augmentation Evoker is just broken, right? That spec is just doing unbelievable amounts of effective damage. It doesn't show up on details properly. It doesn't even show up in Warcraft logs properly, but it is doing unbelievable amounts of damage and also is unkillable. And then your Mage, that's a spot where you can see, so this team has swapped out the Mage for a Balanced Druid. This is just big damage, great power infusion recipient. So it's what most teams have been going with, either playing Frost or Fire so far on the top of our leaderboards. A couple of groups have deviated from this. We're seeing one Sub-Rogue, one Rep Paladin on our front page. As we move to the second page, we're starting to see a little bit of difference. But you have to go pretty deep, right? You have to get 26 runs in before you're seeing a team that deviates by more than just one of those slots, right? And this is, again, very early in the season. People have not had a lot of time to... Like, the fact that that the top runs are looking this homogenous this quickly, I think is an indication that it is especially... Like, normally, if there is a metagame that will condense down to a comp like this, it takes us some time to kind of figure that out, try out a bunch of different stuff, have a bunch of ideas that all seem good, do a bunch of 28s and 29s or whatever the key level is that season with those different comps, and then sort of get the idea like, oh, actually, this spec is just better. But right now, everybody that's tried Augmentation Evoker is playing Augmentation Evoker pretty much. It's unbelievably good spec for 5-player content. So DPS balance also, I think, is in tremendous pain compared to 10.1, where, again, I thought it was doing pretty well, but now we're in a DPS meta where I don't want to say that there's a lot of bad specs. I think there's a lot of good specs still. I think the kind of average spec is still functional and feels fun to play, and that's really good. But this is what happens when there's like 3, 4, or 5 specs, and especially specs that synergize and complement each other's weaknesses and fill in gaps in your composition that are just noticeably far enough ahead of the other options that it basically becomes very hard, if you're in a position of like designing your group comp, to deviate very much at all from this composition here. And the teams that are deviating are making one deviation. And, again, it's been 50 hours since the patch came out. I suspect that a lot of the teams that are deviating are going to feel the pressure to conform over the next couple of weeks if they want to stay at the top of the leaderboards. So, yeah, pretty cursed balancing for Mythic Plus so far. Again, I want to emphasize that my analysis here is confined to top level key pushing. Although I suspect you'll see this in the Great Push as well, because that's also going to be probably similar level keys with, I suspect, pretty much these exact comps will be what you'll be seeing there. But when we took a look deeper into the content, or deeper into the pages, right, you can see there's a lot more still representation of other stuff. Even here, though, even in these 20s, a lot of augmentation showing up for a spec that is a day or two old. There are other specs that are good, that are being played, that are doing well. You can time your weekly keys with absolutely anything. That part they're still doing well on. They haven't broken that part of the game. But for hyper-competitive teams, that side of things has gotten a lot worse, is my synopsis for Mythic Plus. Now for Raid, Augmentation Evoker is a very hard thing to evaluate, because it's my belief that Augmentation Evoker is probably adding the most damage to most of these runs. But the problem with Augmentation Evoker is that not all of the damage that Augmentation is providing actually gets attributed to the Augmentation Evoker, even in logs. And the way that this works is, right now, pet damage and accumulated damage, so damage of an ability like Touch the Magi or Ignite, those sorts of effects that build up based off of complicated multiple calculations, those sources of damage are being attributed. They're not being attributed to the Augmentation Evoker when the Augmentation Evoker is increasing them. And so if you look at the rankings on Warcraft logs right now, you're going to see, what is this? Oh, 10 pet classes, right? These people are being affected by Augmentation Evokers, and the damage is being credited to them rather than the Augmentation Evoker. 10 classes that are benefiting from that. Here again, we're seeing these Fire Mages, right, are also benefiting from the Ignite additional damage that's being provided by the Augmentation Evokers being assigned to them, right? Almost all of the classes that you're going to see on the front page right now are benefiting from Augmentation Evoker extra damage. Even Devastation Evoker, their Obsidian Shard set bonus, I believe, behaves this way as well. So yeah, it's very hard right now to get a cursory glance of how much value Augmentation is providing. But we can get kind of a lower bound of it by actually just looking at the Augmentation rankings. And so you can see on Kazara, right, the top logs were doing about 190k. The top Augmentation log is doing 153k as of right now. I suspect that when you actually filter correctly, like what if all the math were being done properly, I suspect that the Augmentation Evokers are providing the most value to the raid in terms of like how much damage they're actually bringing. But it is very hard to answer this definitively. But Augmentation is performing extremely, extremely well in raid. The other problem with this, for the purposes of something like a meta, video, is if we want to look at something like the statistics page in this patch, these top specs are largely the specs that are going to be dealing extra damage that is not going to be correctly attributed. Like the top specs are the ones that are stealing Augmentation's damage on their logs, which means it's going to be very right. Like, yeah, if you look on these logs right now, Augmentation looks like it's the lowest damage spec according to where its median is, which to some extent it's to be expected over the first 2 days. People are going to be making a lot more rotational errors on Augmentation, given that the spec is only 2 days old, than they will on most other specs. But I would argue that Augmentation is probably, if you took down Fire, Demo, Unholy by the percentage of their damage that is being given to them by an Augmentation Evoker, and you gave that damage to the Augmentation Evoker, I think Augmentation would be near the top. Other stuff we've been seeing, Mage specs, all Mage specs seem to be doing pretty well post Mage rework, not only in terms of damage, but in terms of quality of life. The game has gotten a lot more fun to play as a Mage. Warlock, AF has gotten a big quality of life increase. AF also synergizes very nicely with Augmentation. In particular, a lot of the AF damage actually does correctly get attributed to Augmentation, but they're one of the specs that just like, if you looked at total raid DPS, that combination works out really nicely. The Affliction Warlock and the Augmentation Evoker, it also works out really well in 5-player content, although of course it's hard to slot those two together at the same time because, where are your Shadow Priests and where's your Mage then? Rogue side of things, Sub-Rogues still looking like the spec that most people are playing right now. There were some buffs that landed on the other Rogue specs in the patch, although the promised Rogue rework didn't end up happening in this patch. I suspect Sub is still going to be the premier Rogue spec, but maybe still early to see if something like Outlaw will end up gaining some ground over the next couple of days. Frost DK, there's been some talk I've seen of some different Frost DK builds that have been looking good and working out nicely. So cool to see them up here with the Unholy DKs on this chart. And again, I think one big thing to remember is that any Warcraft logs chart like this, even before the Augmentation fiasco, in terms of just like Augmentation making it really hard to actually get good data, this is always a very incomplete picture of things. One thing that I think is probably still true about this as well is that the medians here are reasonably close together for most of these specs. Augmentation's particularly on the low end, Fire Mage is particularly on the high end, although Fire Mage is also, so much of their damage comes from Ignite, and that is something that they're stealing from Augmentation Evoker right now on logs. So I think that it's fair to say that, at least in my opinion, I think the raid DPS balance is quite good. Now, over on the healer side of things in raid, let's see, change this over to healing for healers. We're seeing the same plague atop our charts here. A lot of medians awfully close together on the other 6 healing specs. But Holy Paladin is looks like a massive chunk ahead of the other specs, which is not even factoring in the damage reduction value of Devotion Aura and the value it's provided during Aura Mastery as well. So basically just Holy Paladin probably needs some moderately large, like Holy Paladin at this point. If I was a Holy Paladin main and I saw a 10% nerf coming next week, I would probably celebrate that it was only a 10% nerf and hope that that means that there doesn't have to be any more coming, because right now I think Holy Paladin is, I mean, we played 2 of them in our main raid this week. We had one of our players who wanted to play Holy Paladin in M+, have his Holy Paladin alt come into our main raid, and it was just smashing the healing meters. Let's see if we can take a look at some of the kills. I haven't looked at this before this video, so it's possible I'll pick one fight where that wasn't true. But oh no, here it is. Yeah, here's our Sarkareth HPS again, not factoring in the value of Devotion Aura and Retribution Aura. And yeah, this is not especially normal. And then if you look at the healer damage, it's not like they're losing out there either. Their healer damage is also still good as well. So yeah, healer balance, I struggle to make too much of a diagnosis here as a non-healer main, but especially on it seems like the other 6 healer specs are all reasonably close to each other. Maybe Disc Priest still needs a little bit of love as well. But Holy Paladin definitely looks like an outlier in both Raid and Mythic Plus. So Holy Paladin probably could use some across-the-board nerfs, whereas and Augmentation, I think, as well, is maybe it's a little bit early to say, but I suspect that also probably needs some across-the-board power taken out of it. Fire, Shadow, maybe AF, those ones maybe you need to target a little bit more to make sure you're not going to gut them in Raid while potentially taking them down a peg in M+. And then tank balance. I guess let's talk about tanks in Raid as well. So here's tank damage. Again, we're not looking at all that many parses yet. Sample size is still a little small, but you can see there's sort of the high damage tanks, which includes Brewmaster and Vengeance, which have been traditionally pretty high damage tanks this expansion. Guardian as well, a spec that does quite a bit of damage and has been getting some buffs, gets some nice talents this patch as well. And then you got Prot Paladin, Blood DK, and Prot Warrior near the bottom. Blood DK has sustained a lot of buffs over the past couple of cycles. Still one of the lowest damage tanks, but I think it's not unfair for Blood DK to have damage be its weakness. It just needs to not be like way weaker than the other tanks. Because when you look at metrics, I'm not sure if you can actually look at. Yeah, there's a metric you can look at when you're actually looking in a log called external healing required per second, which shows how much like outside healing a tank needs, and Blood DK always does really well on this metric. You can find this in the damage taken tab. EHRPS is what you click on here, and you can see like, oh yeah, you know, Brewmaster, I needed a lot of external healing over the course of this fight, right? And like often you'll find tanks are at the top of this list, but if we go and we look at one of the fights where we had a Blood DK, actually Blood DK still did fairly high on this metric on this pull, but often you'll see a Blood DK near the bottom or the middle of the pack on this metric, which is something that you don't really see on the bigger statistics pages. So I don't know. The TLDR here is I think the tank balance is looking reasonably good for Raid at least. I think you can succeed on most of the different tank specs, and really the biggest reason right now to, in my opinion, like you kind of want to solve your tanks based on which raid buffs you need if you're looking to design an optimal comp. Like if there was a new progression raid that came out tomorrow, I think that's probably what you would be using your tanks for, is like, is there a specific mechanic we need to solve with a certain tank? Otherwise, you know, do we want to play a different monk? Do we want to play a Havoc Demon Hunter, right? Do we want to play any other type of druid? Or do we want to secure those raid buffs from these tanks? I think that's the way that question would be answered, which I have my gripes with that as like the philosophy behind how the game functions right now. But given that is how they've decided raid buffs work, that means I think the balance is quite good between the tanks, at least for raid. So yeah, that's, I guess, a quick look at both Raid and Mythic Plus metagame and balancing and stuff. Let me know what you thought of this video. Let me know how you are feeling about the patch, the Augmentation Evokers. Again, I was cautiously optimistic and still am cautiously optimistic about the implementation of Augmentation Evoker here, but I think it probably does need to get toned down a little bit, and it is definitely frustrating that now Details does not really give you good feedback about the damage you're doing anymore in game, and also even on the Warcraft log side of things, that's been detached, because We can still find that information. Now we just have to do math, which is, it makes life a little bit worse if you're somebody who's trying to play the game to perform well, right? You're somebody who's trying to do a lot of damage, which not everybody plays the game that way, and it's great if you're somebody who doesn't enjoy like that sort of play style. But I always have been somebody who's loved looking at the damage meter to get some kind of instant feedback on if what I did this pull versus last pull was better or worse. And augmentation coming into the game without really being fully supportable through details and through Warcraft logs. I'm sure that Blizzard and details and Warcraft logs are all working on making it show up better, but at least on launch, that's definitely a bit of a growing pain in the spec. And then, the fact that it just gives you extra keystone levels by being super duper duper OP is definitely one of them as well. I'm pretty sure I 3-chested a 20 in like a weekly key with multiple alts, just using an augmentation evoker. Like we were just before raid, just doing some keys with an augmentation evoker, and here, look at these. I guess a lot of these are. I guess only 3 of these were done before raid, but this is a lot faster than the keys that I had been doing with pretty much the same gear a couple of weeks ago. Right, one chest of 20 into. I guess it's a Underrot versus a Brackenhide, so. Maybe it's not a fair comparison, but it certainly feels like everything is a lot easier right now when you have an augmentation evoker in your group. And yeah, okay, that's it. I'm going to stop rambling now. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. Remember to hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Also, if you see any comments, any replies to any comments that say, like from Telegram or whatever, to get a free gift or something, that is not me. That is a scam. Do not interact with those. They're trying to steal your stuff. Bye.